Just remember to press the button on when you guys speak, please. You've done it. The other three have not.
Like taking yourself off mute.
Yes.
Yes. Can you hear me okay? Okay, this is the April 20th, 2022 meeting of the Los Osos Groundwater Basin Management Committee. So with that being said, I will go ahead and call the meeting to order. Could we please rise for the flag salute first? Daniel, you get to lead us.
I was not prepared for that.
All you gotta do is start it. We'll cover the rest for you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, with that being said, could we go ahead and have a roll call, please, Laura?
I can do the roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem.
My mind went back to,
Director Cody,
Present.
Director Reilly,
Present.
Director Zimmer,
Here.
Chair O'Hilsky.
present.
Okay, everyone accounted for?
Okay. So we'll go to item number 3, the board member comments. Board members may make brief comments, provide project status updates, or communicate with other directors, staff, or the public regarding non-agenda items. So does any director have a comment at this point? I'm just glad to be back in person so we can have a little better back and forth communication. So do you have something to say?
Nope, no comment.
Okay, so special presentation number 4, we have none of that. The consent agenda. There's 2 items on the consent agenda. There's the 2022 budget update and invoice register, and there's the approval of the minutes from the February 16th, 2022 BMC meeting. Does anybody want to poll either of those items? Okay, seeing no polling, does anybody have any comments on that?
If you'd like to make a public comment
No,
and
no. Hold on. I was wanting to see if these guys had any. Okay. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the board?
Nope.
Okay, now we'll go to public comment.
if you'd like to make a public comment and you're online, please raise your hand. If you're in person, please come on up to the podium.
Hi, Lindy O, and I just wanted to know what the password was. Okay.
There's no public comment online.
There was no public comment here either. Okay, Lindy, this was your opportunity to ask that question. It was for public comments on items not on the agenda.
I'm still trying to get into this. I was gonna stay home.
Okay. So Laura, will public comments for items not appearing on the agenda?
Do you want to hear one?
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're in person, come up to the podium. And if you're online, please raise your hand.
Lindy Owen from, of course, Los Osos. Again, I think that I just bring the voice of the community that's very, very concerned about new development coming in. This all over California, we're looking at the same troubles of not being able to supply enough water. And I think we need to go with severe caution ahead. So when it starts raining a lot again and we see our aquifers overflowing, that's a good time to look at housing again. But right now, I think we need to tighten it up. And I just speak for my community, I think. Thanks.
Thank you, Lindy. Any other additional comments?
All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Good afternoon, Patrick McGibney with the Sustainability Group. It's appreciated that you adjusted one of the metrics used for modeling, but it may be too little, too late. After 7 years of management, the vital, bold, decisive, and immediate actions directed by the Basin Plan to achieve its primary goals of stopping and reversing seawater intrusion as much as possible and providing a sustainable water supply have still not been implemented. as directed in the basin plan on page 4, section 1.2, and I quote, "To halt seawater intrusion, the purveyors must largely discontinue production of groundwater from the lower aquifer in the western area. To stop producing water from that portion of the basin, the Los Osos community will need to decrease its water demand and increase water supplies available from the upper aquifer and the lower aquifer in the central and eastern areas. Accessing those supplies requires construction of new infrastructure, including groundwater production wells, distribution pipelines, and community nitrate removal facility." End of quote. This has not happened to a large extent, mainly because of the lack of finances, but we could be running out of time to save our basin. Most of you agree that a viable option would be to be under the control of SGMA. This would open up numerous funding opportunities for grants. It would require the metering of all wells, or could require that, which would make actual monitoring possible and take the guesswork out of it, creating hard data to establish a working sustainable yield. I've spoken with DWR and our regional water board, and they're all have been very encouraging. It would require the purveyors to petition the court asking to be removed from an adjudicated basin status and to be allowed to go under SGMA, stating the inability to safely manage the basin due to a lack of finances, and that half of our water extraction is unmetered, making it nearly impossible to adequately monitor the basin. It's unknown at this time whether the BMC would remain the GSA or if other shareholders would be invited to join, or whether the Los Osos Basin Plan would be the GSP without it first getting revamped and updated. Regardless, there's already a lot of work that's been done, and I strongly encourage you to research the many benefits of SGMA and to start the conversation. There is no implication this will be easy, but we have a basin that can be saved. We just need the ability to save it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I've spoke on several occasions in connection with the topic of well abandonments. And I'd like to further suggest that the BMC staff engage in the preparation and really manipulation of a database of all wells in Los Osos, in our groundwater basin, and identify the locations. And this is in the agricultural area and the rural area of Los Osos. Most of the wells are plotted by the health department. We know where they're at. Voluntary programs relative to extractions and water quality could be engaged in. This is something that I think should be a priority for, again, BMC staff. There are water quality benefits also from identifying and in some cases abandoning wells. Borehead leakage is a problem. We have several hundred wells out there, most of which I would guess 60% are either not being used or have been partially abandoned. This is a database that we need to get our arms around. And so, this is something, frankly, that should have been done some time ago. Again, it's a priority. If we're going to manage the groundwater basin, how do we do it without knowing where all the wells are? And again, I think once we know that information, to implement an abandonment program, a well abandonment program, I think would have real advantages, again, both from a water quality and water quantity standpoint. And by the way, the idea that we need to be a SGMA basin to better understand how much water we're using is kind of ridiculous. We don't need money. We don't need to be a SGMA basin to attract money. The purveyors are implementing all the projects. Money's not the issue. So anyway, that suggestion really is misplaced in this context. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right, Robin, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Robin McPeak, and the purpose of my commentary is to express my concern about the Los Osos water basin. There should be no new development in Los Osos until there is conclusive evidence, not obtained by outdated modeling metrics, that there's a sustainable water supply for the existing population. And as the three water purveyors know, the Coastal Commission very recently told Trevor Keith and County Planning and Building to stop accepting applications for new builds until the Estero plan is updated and certified by the Coastal Commission. The water basin is in serious overdraft, and decisions and actions should be taken to correct this. Measures like retrofit offsets and water ratios have not been effective. Other solutions and tactics need to be used, which could require more funding. But this shouldn't be financed by more water rate increases for the residents of Los Osos. Would being under Sigma help get access to grants and funds? And how can the water basin be managed if the amount of water being extracted is unknown? Would being under Sigma require metering to wells? Because I don't know exactly what being under Sigma would mean, but if it allows more access to grants and requires the metering of all wells, it's a possibility that should be explored. Thank you very much.
All right, Elaine, you just have to unmute yourself. Elaine, I don't see a microphone is attached for you. We still can't hear you, Elaine. I don't have any connection. There's no further public comment at this time.
Okay, we'll end public comment. Daniel, do you have any comments? I have some comments about the Sigma thing since I was involved in a bankruptcy and why we went that route, but do you have something else?
No, I'll defer to you, Marshall, on the comments about Sigma. I mean, Sigma is obviously new legislation that's leading groundwater management throughout the state. This basin currently is exempt from Sigma, as was outlined in the legislation because of the adjudication. There are certain authorities and grant funding opportunities that Sigma does provide, but it's a completely separate regulatory framework at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, there are funding opportunities outside of Sigma too. So that's not that we're not, by being in Sigma, we're not taking away those opportunities to get those fundings. But Sigma allows us to control the basin ourselves. If we went out of Sigma, then the state would have the ability to control the basin. And I don't really think we want to do that. So that's why we went this route when we went through the bankruptcy, because we wanted to be able to have a say on how the basin was managed. That's why all adjudicated basins are exempt from Sigma.
Excuse me, this is Cody from S&T. I think, Marshall, just to enlarge on that idea about being managed by the state, there would certainly as an SGMA basin, the Los Osos Basin would have oversight from the state. Is that what you mean by managed by?
Yes. We would, I guess the best way to put it is we wouldn't have total control over the basin, which we do now. Whereas if we were,
Okay.
I mean, but when you go in the other situation, you're subject to state rules, which could change on a spur of the moment that we're not subject to now. We're exempt from all the Sigma requirements. I mean, you might like it today, but they may change the law tomorrow and we don't like it. And then once we go out of Sigma, we can't, or go, you know what I'm saying? Once we go into Sigma, we can't go out of it again. So, we'd have to petition a bankruptcy court to allow us to do that. And I'm not sure why the court would agree to do that even.
I think that they might, and that's an interesting question. I'm personally, I'm interested in the concept of becoming an SGMA basin. And my incorrect understanding so far is that it would just require a petition of the members of, no, okay,
No, the bankruptcy court is part of the bankruptcy.
okay.
That's why we're exempt, because adjudicated basins are exempt from SGMA. So we had to go back through the adjudication.
Yep. Stipulated judgment court.
Daniel, do you have anything else to add to the questions?
I guess just point of clarification, when we talk about the bankruptcy court, we're referring to the court and the judge that approved the stipulated judgment? Okay.
Why is that referred to as the bankruptcy court?
Because that was part of our bankruptcy.
The bankruptcy of the CSD.
Correct.
I don't-
All you guys were parties to that.
Yes.
So that's, I mean, we all had meetings ahead of time at Wallace Group. I mean, you remember having those meetings, and
I thought it was initiated by a lawsuit that was launched by the CSD. By reading the stipulated judgment, there's a description of that. But I'll defer to your expertise being a lawyer on this.
I'm sorry. No, it was something, what we did and didn't do was for the benefit of all four of the parties that are sitting at this table.
Yeah, I think we're just maybe getting tripped up on the term bankruptcy. I think, yeah, there was an agreement that went, and a lawsuit that initiated the adjudication, the development of the stipulated judgment and the basin plan that was ultimately approved by all four stipulating parties and the Superior Court. And we haven't referred to them, to my knowledge, as the bankruptcy court historically, but the Court of California that approved the adjudication, I believe. Is that what you're referring to, Marshall?
Yeah, it was the appeals court in Ventura. So I was there for the hearings. And we also had some hearings in San Francisco too. So anyway, I mean, if you want to put that on the back door, I don't want to get into detailed discussion because it's not on the agenda, but
Right.
we can put that as something that we'll look into a little more detail and bring back at a later date.
Yeah, are you suggesting that we might look into that?
I'm just
agenda?
saying, if that's what you want to do.
I think that would be a good idea to look into this a little bit more formally.
I disagree with that. We're in the process of what we're doing today, and it was made in public comment. I'm party to a Sigma, and it's not in the best interest of Golden State. So I would disagree with that.
I disagree with it too, so it's,
If we have it.
I mean, can we just take a straw vote? How many would favor us looking into it some more? All yeses.
S&T would be in favor of taking a look at this, at becoming a Sigma base.
I think from the county's perspective, at least as of today, I don't think we would be in favor of looking at that future option.
Okay, thank you. All right.
And I echo that comment, to where we're at today. I'm not saying that that's, not something we want to go down the road and look at in the future. But today, there's just so many unknowns with Sigma in the process. I would like to stay the course that we're on right now. Let's see this through a little bit further, and then if that becomes a more viable option down the road, we could consider it then.
Okay, I think we're, excuse me, a majority of us are in agreement. So let's move on with the agenda here. Excuse me. So the next item is Executive Director's Report. Excuse me.
Public comment for items not on the agenda is what I have.
That's what we just did.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Though I do think a point of order, I think we need to go back to the consent agenda. I don't think we ever took a formal vote to approve the consent agenda.
Oh, you're.
Do we need to do a roll call, or can we just? Okay, I think
I'm
we've been
sorry,
doing
that's
roll
my
calls
fault.
because we're on Zoom, but now that we're back in person.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mark, and is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do you want to take a roll call, Daniel, then?
Sure. Director Cody,
Approve.
Director Reilly,
Approve.
Director Zimmer,
Approve.
Chair Hilsky.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, now we can move on to Executive Director's Report, item number 7 on our agenda.
Thank you, Marshall. Members of the BMC and the public, pleased to provide this executive director's report to you in person and online. Based on just a little bit of formatting, as you can see in the executive director's report, there are a number of items that are highlighted. Those represent items that have been updated since the previous executive director's report. Other items are retained on the executive director's report as a point of reference for somebody potentially wanting information on other BMC related items that may not have been updated within this report. Before I want to dig into what's in this report, I did also want to highlight that there's an upcoming characterized as a Los Osos Community Advisory Council LOCAC outreach event on May 1st. It'll be in the Red Barn, and I don't remember exactly what, from 2 to 5 p.m. The organizers of that event requested that the Basin Management Committee attend to be able to provide information about the Basin Management Committee and its role within groundwater management here within Los Osos. And so I will be in attendance at that event to help inform and direct people to the BMC for questions and or interest in groundwater monitoring here within the community. I'll be working with the BMC party staff for any other relevant information that we may want to provide at that event, but looking forward to the opportunity to engage with the community and spread awareness around Los Osos water management. Okay, digging into the report, the first update item is on the IRWM, or Integrated Regional Water Management Program. Currently, the call for projects for the Prop 1 Round 2 implementation grant cycle has been initiated, and it closes on April 28th, 2002. This is a grant program. This is probably, there have been a number of iterations of this program. This is actually, I think, currently the last iteration, at least, that's currently funded for the IRWM grant program. But it's been a great program that it provides funding for regional water management projects. However, pretty specifically focused on implementation projects, typically projects that are shovel ready. At this point, the BMC doesn't necessarily have a project that it's envisioning or that we've talked about submitting, but the individual purveyors or parties may have projects that they're submitting to that program. We'll be talking more about that at our staff meeting later this month. All right. The other grant item that I wanted to focus on is the water recycling funding program. We've talked about funding program study, I should say. We've talked about this at a number of meetings. This is a opportunity to leverage funding contributed by the county to obtain an equivalent amount or $150,000 in grant funding to fund the development of a transient groundwater model, and then to utilize that transient model to evaluate recycled water and other supplemental supply opportunities to improve the sustainability of the basin. I'm characterizing it a little bit as an opportunity to update the projects chapter of the basin plan. You know, the basin plan was developed in 2015. There's a lot of great information in there, but a lot of that information is dated, especially the cost information, as well as some of the sustainable yield estimate information could be improved through the use of a transient model and also through inclusion of the current constraints that the Basin Management Committee is utilizing for calculating sustainable yield. Those constraints that were incorporated in the update to the sustainable yield that was completed in October of 2021. The county has approved their $150,000 contribution and is currently working on a cost reimbursement agreement with the LOCSD. The application for the grant funding has been submitted. It's under review by the State Water Resource Control Board. I was hoping to be able to say today that we've got confirmation on that funding and we're ready to release the RFP, which is an item later in the agenda. Fortunately, we have not gotten that final confirmation, but hope to receive that soon. All right. Other updates under the status of BMC initiatives. An update on the basin metric evaluation. Those of you may recall from the last year's budget, we had an initiative to reevaluate the basin metrics. When I say basin metrics, I mean the water level metric, the chloride metric, the basin yield metric, the nitrate metric, and the upper aquifer metric, and to potentially identify ways or opportunities that those metrics could be improved to account for newly available monitoring wells, new hydrogeologic information, updated wellhead survey information. There are a number of things that have occurred or developments that have occurred since those metrics were established with the original basin plan. And so we were looking at this as an opportunity to potentially modify those metrics if they would help. We thought that it would help improve our ability to assess the health of the basin. That we did receive some recommendations, however, from the BMC's hydrogeologist. However, we're currently putting that initiative on hold based on interest from BMC party staff to look at opportunities to improve the basin monitoring network. So just clarification, the basin metrics are how we take the data from the monitoring program and analyze it to assess the health of the basin. The basin monitoring program are the wells and water quality analyses that we complete to gather data on the basin. And so currently we've requested Cleith Harris geologists to focus on providing recommendations for how we can improve the basin monitoring program, and then potentially incorporate any of those improvements into potential modifications to the basin metrics. Specifically on the monitoring program improvements, we anticipate getting recommendations for how we can improve the monitoring program. This year, we have money budgeted in the BMC budget to perform a modification to one or maybe a number of wells, depending on the type of modification, to improve those wells as to provide better monitoring data to the BMC for its analysis of the basin. There was interest in funding a completely new monitoring well this year. Unfortunately, we weren't able to identify enough funding in the BMC budget. So the current plan, and all this will come to the BMC for their consideration and approval, would be to at least modify one of the existing wells in the basin, lower dollar amount this year we can achieve with funding we have, and then try to incorporate potentially a new monitoring well into the calendar year 2023 budget. And then come back to the BMC with potential recommendations for the basin metrics. I think I've covered the transient groundwater model already. I also covered the lower aquifer monitoring evaluation with that previous item. Moving down to the status of basin implementation and funding plans. As the BMC knows, that we have a consultant supporting the BMC doing a funding evaluation. They are looking to update the previously completed TOSIC report on different funding options available to the BMC to fund both basin monitoring and management, but also to fund potentially infrastructure projects in the future. They will also be developing a basin funding model that will provide information to help us better understand, how much funding and what the fee impacts for those types of fundings under the different options would require. A draft report has been submitted to BMC party staff, which is under review. And once we've gone through that review and update, then we'll be bringing the funding study to the BMC for consideration. And next is the BMC Legal Counsel. As the BMC recalls, we incorporated budget within the executive director's budget for 2022 and authorize the use of that budget to hire and or be able to access BMC dedicated legal counsel to address questions that may come up. The update to that is there's an RFP, a later item in the agenda for the procurement of dedicated legal counsel for the Basin Management Committee. Moving down to land use and planning process updates, the Title 19 water offset study update. The county is leading a project to evaluate water usage in the Los Osos Basin. They've hired a consultant to assist with that effort. The consultant's efforts are currently underway. They've received all the data from the purveyors. They're analyzing that data and will be bringing back recommendations at a later date. Scheduling updates can be found at the county's website. And then updates on ADUs. On May 17th, the County Board of Supervisors will be considering accepting the Coastal Commission's suggested modifications to the coastal ADU ordinance, which includes not allowing ADUs in the Los Osos groundwater basin boundary and or within the Los Osos groundwater basin plan area. And additional information on those modifications can be found at the Coastal Commission's February 11th, 2022 meeting. Additionally, in June, the Board of Supervisors will be considering accepting the Coastal Commission's suggested modifications to the Los Osos vacation rental ordinance, which includes requiring hosts to post signage encouraging water conservation. Again, additional information on that can be obtained at the Coastal Commission's February 11th, 2022 meeting agenda packet and recording. The Los Osos wastewater project flow and connection update is also provided. We have wastewater and recycled water data for January, February, March of 2022. And we'll continue to update that as we progress throughout the year. And then one additional change that I made to this month's executive director's report is I incorporated the updated status of basin plan projects, just in an effort to streamline the agenda packets and to be able to provide, instead of having it as a dedicated agenda item, which I'll just incorporate as part of the executive director's report, update the status of the projects as they move forward and provide opportunity for the BMC to comment or provide direction as needed. So that concludes my executive director's report.
I have a question before. So one of the things that hasn't gotten any attention is the ability for people to build a bedroom unit on their property, which I know of at least 2 or 3 properties where they're building a bedroom unit, but they're going to turn it over into an ADU. There's one that I won't mention where it is, but they're building this new $250,000 building, and in the adjacent building, they have a quote unquote kitchen for their staff, which and just happens to be a thin wall between that kitchen and the unit. And then down below, there's a 350 square foot storage area that the stairs go right down there. So once they're done, they could turn that into a living room with no problems. So I don't understand why this bedroom unit is not subject to the moratorium in Los Osos. I understand that it quote unquote doesn't have water features, other than a single bathroom, but it still seems to me that the opportunity is there for people to build these and then turn them over once they got final by construction. So, or by, pardon me, by the building department. So I'm just wondering, and I'm looking for discussion with us, do we want to add that to agenda to address concerns about the bedroom unit?
Yes, I think that either the three purveyors could get together and write an opinion letter, might be a way of doing that, or
Well,
we
that would
could
be
do that.
quicker, yeah.
That might be quicker. I will say that S&T Mutual Water Company has, like the CSD and like Golden State, has declared a water shortage emergency. And in our water shortage emergency plan, our board of directors has resolved to not supply a will serve permission to a remodel project that is likely to cause an increase in water production. So we have been reviewing proposals for remodels and approving them or denying will serve based on that. And we have a flow chart that we use, and I'd share that with anybody who would like to see it. It's on our website.
No, I like the idea of staff getting together and submitting a letter expressing our concerns about potential increased water usage from a bedroom unit.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Did you, I'm not gonna, yesterday, the Coastal Commission sent a very important letter to Trevor Keith of the Planning and Building Department on this subject. And
On the bedroom units or just the
it
water?
includes discussion about whether that would be allowed or not
Oh,
over the
really?
Los Osos Basin.
Have you seen that letter yet?
Yes, I have. I'll send you a copy.
Thank you. But I agree with you. I think getting the purveyors together to write a letter.
Yeah, I think it's time to do that. I think it's easy. I don't think that that's a difficult thing to come to an agreement on. It's just a small deviation from the agreement letter we wrote previously.
Okay.
Would that scenario that you described, though, now it's a unpermitted addition to the house, right? I mean, anybody can, if they're going to do a devious act, I mean, they're going to do that one way or another. So the fact that it wasn't permitted and they changed it and altered it.
That's
Well,
that's to be policed by planning and building.
Yeah.
We can't, as water
Right.
companies, we're not going to
But
police
what
that. obviously.
Charlie's saying is we could just say that this has to be a hurdle that they have to pass before they can get the building permit,
Got it. Okay.
right?
Yeah, and you might take a look at the flow chart we have. It's very easy to work your way through it's for our shareholders, our water customers, to help them save money when they approach planning and building with a permit application about what would be allowed and what wouldn't be allowed for will serve.
Okay. I think that's helpful.
Yeah. We'll take a look at that.
Okay, well, we'll just give that as direction then, is that?
Yeah.
Direction to,
Yeah, so we can take that direction and bring it up at our next BMC party staff meeting, which is next week, and
because like I said, I'd like to
talk
see
about
this
moving forward.
move forward as quickly as possible.
Well, and I think the timing is right. As Charlie mentioned, and the Coastal Commission did recently send a letter to county planning outlining their perspectives on what should and should not be allowed under the current coastal development permit requirements and other ordinances. And so
It sounds like the timing's perfect then.
yeah.
I have a couple comments. So regarding attending events and giving presentations, Dan, I think, your attendance to these events and providing a presentation to the public, we want to support that. And I think it may be helpful, though, just to put those in your executive director report, just to, one reason, document them that we were there and, keep us as directors informed on when these events are coming and, maybe have attended and future attended or something like that. And just may be helpful to have that information. Regarding the WRFP, the timing of that, I know you were expecting to hear something back. Is there an official date when that comes out, or is it just a little bit unclear at this point when you expect to hear something back? I don't know if you want me to go. I got a couple of them.
No, that one's quick. It's an open enrollment grant program,
Okay.
so there is no strict deadline. They
Got
take
it.
applications continuously and review them and provide responses as
Got
quickly
it.
as they can.
All right. And the monitoring, you mentioned that about timing. You're talking. I think that shifting to the monitoring evaluation is important, and definitely want to support that. We've made some adjustments. Is that coming back to the next meeting? You mentioned it was going to come back soon, and the reason why I ask is just the date of if we change our monitoring and the data and the process we use, isn't there a date that we have to make that adjustment, or else it falls into that following year? Remember how we did that when we adjusted our data for our annual report, and we were running into a date, and I want to say it had to be done by October. I don't have it in front of me, so it just kind of came up based on your comments.
You mean adopting the sustainable yield number?
Well, yeah, but that ultimately, if we're going into our monitoring, that could impact that number. So I just want to make sure that we're not missing a date, and then any work that we do today, we're not going to be able to use that work for another, what was it, 2 years, right? So I'd like to look at that a little bit closer.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Okay.
The sustainable yield number must be adopted by a unanimous vote of the BMC board in the year prior to the measurement year.
Right.
So for instance, we're going to be looking at a 2021 annual report soon. That's a 2021 measurement year.
Mm-hmm.
So that sustainable yield figure had to have been adopted by a unanimous vote of the board during 2020.
Right. And I want to say it's before the fall data collection. So,
Might as well.
and that's what I'm not sure. That was my question. We need to look at that a little bit closer.
Excellent.
And so if we do, we need to put priority on that. Yeah, that's it for my comments. We'll talk about that. I think we're going to talk further about the legal counsel.
Right. That's a separate
next one,
agenda
so,
item. Well, thank you for those excellent comments. I
Sure.
thought that they were. Any other comments before we go to public comment? Okay, Laura.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're online, please raise your hand. And if you're in the audience, please come up to the podium.
Thank you, Lindy Owen. Kind of going on that last discussion about the properties adding on bedrooms that get turned into rentals or ADUs. ADUs are tracked at least, and there's a penalty if you get caught having one, and especially if you don't have it permitted. So, but I wonder, I understand that it would be up to the purveyors. Say somebody builds their mansion, they get approval, county says it's all fine. They say they're going to use 150 gallons per day. That's what they promised that they're going to use. But I understood that it was up to the purveyors to make a decision to say that when they go up to, say, 200 gallons per day consistently, and then they go to 3 and 4, and then they have to fill the pool and it goes to 600 gallons a day, that there's a way that you can come in and either cut off their water supply or penalize them heavily. I just wondered if that's true, because that might be a way to monitor the promises that are constantly, oh, we're not going to use water, we offset everything, blah, blah, blah. But we're concerned about the little bit of water adding up to lots of water, especially people that don't have a problem paying their bills. And then a discussion about a temporary moratorium. I mean, I don't see why we're not having one, but on growth. Because right now the outside of the area gets to build houses and people insiders, I mean, we're paying for sewer, we're loaded with all kinds of debts. Whereas people outside the moratorium have a free, they can do anything that the county wants to allow them. And then I wanted to go back to a little bit about the water recycling funding to see where that water is going and if there could be better use. I'm still bothered that we pump all of our recycled water as far away as we can and put it into what is a questionable disposal area because we really don't know. We admit that it's an experiment. Whereas the farmers are busy pumping the water out of the ground, taking it out of our basin. There goes the drinking supply, instead of using that water that was meant to offset their use. Again, the sewer isn't producing a product that the farmers want. They're charging too much for it. There is no encouragement or incentive to use the water right there. We spend all this money to pump it way up there where I don't know, when we're going to find out if that ever worked. And so I'd like that to be put into looking at it. I'd really like to see Broderson reconsidered if it was taken off and the water was offset by the ag. Could we save a lot more? Thank you.
Thank you, Lindy.
All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you again, Jeff Edwards. I wanted to start with the water recycled program planning grant. And we have by 2021 production numbers, 514 acre feet comes out of the sewer plant. Virtually 100% of that needs to go to Broderson. We don't need a study, a survey, a report, or a tech memo to tell us that. The idea behind Broderson, and we need to prove it up or not, is that if we load it sufficiently, it will push through the clay lens and actually realize some seawater intrusion mitigation in the lower aquifer. So we either do it or we don't. Replacing that, dumping the water in the valley for ag users, I don't think that's such a great idea. But maybe in the creek, we've talked about that. So moving right along, on the basin metric evaluation, if you want more locations for monitoring wells, establish a database, which is what I suggested in public comment. You could establish a number of monitoring wells out of the existing wells, in particular if they're not being used. There's this discussion, the SCI Consulting Group report. Apparently there's a draft. Well, when's the public going to get to see that? I don't want to have a report dropped on the public and the BMC at the 11th hour and ask you to approve it. I've objected to this whole funding analysis and organizational structure from day one. Let's keep it simple. The KISS principle. We don't need an additional layer of government. We have admin costs of $300,000 a year to fund. How difficult is that? So then I wanted to talk about this ADU question. And I would urge your committee to actually agendize the item in lieu of generating a hastily prepared letter. This is a complex matter. Are you going to, for example, encourage enforcement to remove all of the illegal RVs that are occupied throughout Los Osos and over the basin? There are dozens of those. And then what about new bedrooms, additional bedrooms and so forth? If they offset their water use at some acceptable ratio, isn't that the whole idea? Water neutral development? So agendize this. Don't run out and have staff prepare a letter. Bad idea. Thank you.
All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. The following is excerpted from an article in the New York Times by Andrew Schwartz, the lead scientist and station manager at the University of California, Berkeley Sierra Snow Lab, entitled, "I am a scientist in California. Here's what worries me most about drought." Quote, California's snowpack is now 39% of its average, or 23% lower than at the same time last year. This signals a deepening of the drought, already the worst in the Western United States in 1,200 years. One of the most important tools for managing water during periods of drought are the models developed. Yet these models suffer from the same simplistic view of drought and water, and they are in dire need of an update. What's prevented updates to the models for decades is shrinking funding for science and engineering. Models may not be able to reliably inform water managers how much rain and snow will run off the land into reservoirs, which can mean severe shortages in the worst case scenarios. We are looking down the barrel of a loaded gun with our water resources in the West. Rather than investigating in body armor, we are hoping that the trigger won't be pulled. The current water monitoring and modeling strategies aren't sufficient to support the increasing number of people who need water. I'm worried about the next week, next month, year, and about new problems that we'll inevitably face as climate change continues and water becomes more unpredictable. It's time for policymakers who allocate funding to invest in updating our water models rather than maintaining the status quo and hoping for the best. Better water models ultimately mean more accurate management of water, and that will lead to greater water security and availability for the people who now depend on the changing water supply. It is an investment in our future. Further, an investment in our continued ability to inhabit a water scarce region. It's the only way to ensure that we are prepared when the trigger is pulled. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
There's no further public comment at this time.
All right, with that, we'll close public comment and bring it back. I don't think we need any further discussion unless you guys would like to. Okay, we'll move on to the action items then. First one is 8A, presentation of the draft 2021 groundwater production estimates, recycled water deliveries, and basin metrics.
Thank you, Marshall. Yeah, so item 8A, really this is a sneak peek or an early preview of some of the key information that we're going to have in the 2021 annual report. Really what's shown here is just some of the raw data that will be included in the report. What's missing here is obviously a lot of the narrative discussion, analysis, and interpretation that is provided in the annual report based off of that data. And so everybody, the BMC and the public obviously will have the opportunity to review the full report, but we at least wanted to get some of the raw data out here so people have an understanding of how things are progressing and trends are occurring within the basin. So if we can go to slides here. So the first slide here is production data. We have a table that shows a breakdown of the municipal production for 2021, as well as a breakdown of the estimated total production for the basin. Highlights are municipal production conveniently is about half of the total production with 1,026 acre feet in 2021, and total production is estimated also conveniently at 2,000 acre feet per year. A nice round number that hopefully we can helps us all remember. And then we also show historical years for context. One of the beneficial things, and I'll cover it later, but we have seen, at least in this data set and data sets that extend further back, a decreasing trend both in municipal. And when I say municipal, I should be clarified, really, I mean purveyor production, municipal purveyor production. Well, I guess that's the same thing, but there is a domestic component of the estimated basins, what I'm trying to differentiate, that shows up in the totals. If we move to the next slide, What I did here is I just graphed it just to try to provide a visual representation of the total basin production estimates over the data set that we saw in the previous table. Again, as I described, we're seeing a declining trend in total basin production overall, which is beneficial. A significant contributor to that declining trend is the reductions in purveyor production that we've seen since 2013, and is, you know, if you extend this data set and graph further back, we really have seen significant declines from the total production estimates that we have from the late 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s, where basin pumping was estimated as above or greater than 3,000 acre feet per year, or approaching potentially 3,500 acre feet per year in some years back in that time. So, you know, I think it really just highlights the significant conservation efforts that the community has implemented, you know, to save water and in response, you know, to some pretty extreme drought conditions that we saw in 2014 and 15, but also, you know, the water conservation efforts that were included in the connection as a requirement for the community to connect to the sewer. We move on to the next slide. This is an overview of recycled water use. In the first column, we actually have the planned use for recycled water within the basin from the Los Osos Basin Plan. And then in the second column, we have the actual use for calendar year 2021. You know, the big takeaway here is if you look at the bottom totals, you know, we have significantly less recycled water use than was planned, and that primarily is because there's significantly less recycled water available than was initially anticipated when the basin plan was developed. You know, I think overall that's a good thing. That is a direct relationship to the water conservation measures that the community has provided and the reduced use of potable water for indoor uses that has occurred. In terms of how that recycled water is being used in 2021, a very large percentage, I don't know exactly how much, but went to Broderson, 474 acre feet out of the 514 acre feet, with some additional smaller amounts going to the Bay Ridge Leach Field, Sea Pines Golf Course, and some very minor amounts going to agricultural reuse and use as construction water. This slide shows an overview of the basin metrics. There are 4 main metrics that we utilize. These are sort of aggregate indicators to help us understand how the basin is faring, how is the basin's health progressing as we move forward in time. The first metric is the basin yield metric. That's a comparison of estimated pumping to the estimated sustainable yield for the basin. The goal is for that metric to be at 80 or less, 80% or less. The calculated value in the 2021 annual report is for 72, which is a decrease from the 2020 report. This is the reason it's a decrease is the estimate for production in 2021 was lower than the estimate for production in 2020. Granted, 10 acre feet lower, but it does translate to a decrease in the basin yield metric. However, you'll see that asterisk there after the metric. There's been a significant change in the BMC's estimate for sustainable yield for the basin that occurred in October of 2021. That at that meeting, the BMC unanimously approved modifying the sustainable yield estimate from 2,768 feet per year to 2,380 acre feet per year. If that updated sustainable yield estimate was used in this calculation, the basin yield metric would be greater than 80, probably 84, and tell a different story. However, that updated sustainable yield estimate was for calendar year 2022, and is not included in the calculation for calendar year 2021 because the requirements of the stipulated judgment. What has been proposed, and it will be shown in the draft annual report when that comes out, however, is that when we reference the sustainable yield calculation and the basin yield metric, the sustainable yield estimate and the basin yield metric calculation in the 2020 annual report, I would again, as we have in the footnote here, recommend that we include a reference to the updated sustainable yield estimate and the impacts that that would have on the basin yield metric calculations for calendar year 2021 if we were to utilize the updated number. The water level metric is increased from calendar year 2020. It went from 1.8 feet to 2.1 feet, I believe. That increase is an improvement and an indicator that water levels in the basin are increasing, which is a benefit as that helps prevent seawater intrusion. The chloride metric lowered in 2021 relative to 2020. That decrease is also an improvement in the indicators that we have for monitoring the health of the basin. And then finally, the nitrate metric also lowered or decreased, which is an improvement in the monitoring metrics for the basin. Important to point out that the nitrate metric discussed here is an upper aquifer nitrate metric, and the BMC doesn't currently have a lower aquifer nitrate metric that it tracks. Move to the next slide. So here's a graphical representation of the chloride and water level metrics. The chloride metric is shown in red. The water level metric is shown in blue. As you can see by the last data points, there was again a slight increase in the water level metric from 1.8 to 2.1 feet. In the blue there, in the red, there was again a slight decrease in the chloride metric from just a little under 210 to a little bit under what that was. Also shown in this graph in the dashed lines are the projections that were developed with the basin plan for how these metrics would progress as we move forward in time. And these, what you see here is the water level metric projections anticipated building of the Broderson Mound and an increase in the water levels to prevent seawater intrusion and push back seawater intrusion. That's what we see reflected in the chloride metric as well. The estimates are that through time, once the water levels increase sufficiently, that high TDS, that seawater intrusion front, would be pushed back, and the concentrations in those wells would decrease to the levels shown further out in time. This is the nitrate metric. Again, a first water or upper water level metric. We see a decreasing trend in the red triangles or the nitrate metrics that we have for each year. And then shown in green is the 5-year running average based on the latest data. And so we're seeing both a decrease in the sort of not instantaneous, but the values for each year, as well as a decrease in the long-term trend within the nitrate metric. So heading in the right direction. I would point out, I think, while the metric includes a number of the wells, these decreasing trends are influenced by one of the wells that's in close proximity to Broderson. So it's receiving a higher influence of the lower nitrate water coming from the wastewater facility. This is the calculation of groundwater and storage for both spring and fall in 2021. Important to note here, this is, and I should clarify, this is the calculation of the amount of fresh groundwater in storage, and it's broken down into the different portions of the aquifer, both in the sort of the western, central, and eastern, but also in the perched upper and lower both horizontally and vertically sliced in the aquifer. The big takeaways here is that, estimates of 120 to 125,000 of fresh water within the aquifer, within the different aquifer partitions. But if we go to the next slide, I think this is a little more helpful. Is one of the things that we really want to track is the change in storage in the aquifer over time. So here's a comparison of, in the right two columns, of how much fresh water we estimated was changed within the aquifer from 2020 to 2021. And we're estimating total freshwater storage in the aquifer may have decreased around 100 acre feet over that time. There are some gains in the lower aquifer in the western portion, but estimated losses in the eastern alluvial and lower aquifer that led to an overall estimated decrease of total water and storage. Now, relatively small amount compared to the total amount of water estimated to be in storage, 100 versus 120,000. And potentially, Cleve Harris has indicated that some of these changes may be associated with some of the changes in the wellhead elevation information that we improved through some of the survey events, or one of the survey events that occurred in 2021. So it's good that we have good data, but anytime you change a reference point, it could have implications.
Normalized to the new.
I can address that at the end, Charlie. All right, moving on to the next slide. Oh, okay, that's it. Yep. Good. Good timing. I can address the question. The water elevation, reference elevations, and the water levels get adjusted based on the upgraded information, is my understanding. However, I don't believe that Cleve Harris goes back and recalculates the total water and storage retroactively based on those adjustments. And I can verify that and have that answer for the next meeting. But it's this relatively significant level of effort to take all the water level information and translate it to a calculation of volume and storage. And so we may not be going retroactively back to do that. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, questions or comments? Marcus,
Yeah, I have a, regarding the graph in the spring water level composite. How come it's identified as the spring water level composite? And then as far as our average chloride composite, it was just unclear to me. Are we using the fall? I mean, what is it a compilation of all the levels taken throughout the year, or is it, why are we specifying the spring water level and not the spring and the chloride? I guess this is, okay, good.
Yeah, so it's a good question. It's a question I had recently as well. So the water level metric and the water level data shown there only shows data from the spring monitoring events. Whereas the chloride data actually shows data from both the spring and the fall monitoring events. And that's the differentiation. In terms of the history of why we only show spring for water and spring and fall for chloride, I don't necessarily know the exact, the answer or the logic behind that, though. In some ways, it is helpful, and we may want to consider only showing one season for the chloride. But just because with these graphs, my intent is really to show long-term trends. And when you're showing seasonal differences, you're seeing these seasonal fluctuations that can create potentially some noise in what you would, I think of as a long-term trend. Now, I would want to defer to Spencer and who was probably involved in some of those, Spencer Harris, a Cleat geologist, and some of those earlier decisions on why we depict the data this way. But that's my understanding of the difference.
Yeah, I just, I'd want to know what that fall water level looks like. Also, just worst case scenario. I mean, typically what we look at in some of the other basins is, what does our summer pumping look like and what's the result of that? And then just, maybe not have to go into it right now, but a couple of the actual data points from the well, seems like they were a little bit higher. And maybe we can get into that more after, on the staff level and address those and then come back and look at them. Just had a few questions, but probably don't need to go into that detail right now. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Yeah, Charlie.
Yeah, I just recently took all the data from all our annual reports and put it in a spreadsheet to look at it. And I found several arithmetic errors. And I apologize for not looking at it in that detail in my reviews in the past, but there's one here in the draft table 14. It's a rounding situation, possibly the 2,000 total acre feet for 2021 is rounded up from 1996, actually. Probably not a big deal, but it's one of the few, you know what, it's rounded like the other ones. I apologize. I'm going to withdraw that comment. That's rounded up, I think, like the other ones are too, to sort of, it exaggerates that slightly, but I understand we don't know this within 10 acre feet. So I guess I'd like to know more about the logic used to describe the measurements and support the current non-metered production estimates. This has been discussed before. We are seeing this year a fairly significant decrease in agriculture production numbers. It's an estimate, and an increase in the community water. And usually that is written up as part of the text in the annual reports, and I could wait until I see the draft annual report perhaps about that. And then I have also comments like Mark about the lower aquifer monitoring data in some wells in particular, but I think that kind of detail may be not the right, this may not be the right time. And other comments, and probably comments should come anyway after public comment, or should I?
Usually it should come after. But
Okay, then I'll stop and let,
okay.
I'll reserve for later.
Any other? Excuse me. Stop talking and I lost my voice. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to public comment then on item 8A.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you are in the audience, please come to the podium. And if you're online, please raise your hand.
Lindy Owen, I kind of like Charlie, I looked at, if you go back to one of the earliest ones, Dan, it was talking about how much production from ag. Anyway, I don't know how ag could be reducing. It
Table
said that it was
14,
declining.
Table 14.
Yeah, it's one of the, right, this one right here. And even if you go to the next one, you can sort of see the bars. So it looks odd to me. It says that the domestic wells are remaining steady, that light blue. How are we calculating that if we don't have any idea? So you basically are looking at, well, in the prior one, it talks about how it's the ag use is declining. It went from 7 to 500 acre feet or something. If you go back to that prior one. So anyway, I'm just curious, again, until we get meters, usage meters on these private wells, I don't know where you come up with these calculations. It's hotter, it's warmer. I don't think ag has reduced its size, its footprint. I only see it growing everywhere. And then on the nitrate table, it talked about the 2021, and it said that the nitrate was declining, but it was at 17%. That was a little bit further. The nitrate measurement next, that one. No, next one. Yeah, so in there, no, that's a chloride. Anyway, it said it was declining, but it's at 17%, and our goal is 10.5, I believe. So I'm not sure how you could say it's declining if it's higher. So just wondered about those two.
Thank you.
All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you again. My name is Jeff Edwards, and in table 13, I'd just like to remind the committee that peak water demand for the purveyors was in 1988, and it was over 2,500 acre feet, and now we're down to 1,026 according in 2021. Likewise, agriculture, while it may be expanding in area, is also realizing greater efficiencies in water application. And I would submit that that's what's happening in agriculture. And it will continue to become more efficient. Farmers don't want to pay the electric bill to pump more water out of the ground. Farmers are stingy. Also part of table 14 is the domestic usage, and it's remained constant at about 220 acre feet from 2014. And this is the rural properties, an acre, typically an acre, that have a well on them. And I believe personally that the 220 acre feet is well overstated. Maybe it's overstated by 100%. I believe it's probably closer to 110 acre feet from domestic. And interestingly enough, the Madaus study that's pending relative to Title 19 is supposed to estimate water usage for that domestic area. It'll be interesting to see how much they come up with. Then with regard to the nitrate metric and those numbers, it started, I recall at 22, was down to 20. And so it seems to be in a lowering trend. And somebody ought to tell the Coastal Commission about that, because the Coastal Commission in their throw everything against the wall and see what sticks strategy is using nitrates, elevated nitrates, as a reason to curb the trickle of development that there is in Los Osos today. And then lastly, I'd like to refer to table 25, recycled water usage. We have, again, 514 acre feet in 2021. And yes, indeed, the lion's share of it went to Broderson. But as I've suggested before, all of it needs to go to Broderson. We're killing oak trees at the Bay Ridge Estates leach fields. And the agricultural reuse consists of 2 lawns on Blue Heron View Lane. Not exactly what you're interested in my estimation. Thank you.
All right, Larry, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Larry Rayo. On this, back to the 2021 groundwater production chart, I guess it's table 14. I have an issue with the agriculture use also. I'd really like to see exactly how that was calculated. We had a hydrogeologist review that, and we've submitted our report to you, and she felt that the ag use was way off. It should be up around 800. And when I reviewed that document, it looked like part of the reason why it was lowered was because of the high soil moisture back a few years ago when we actually had some rain, but it doesn't look like it's been recalculated. Soil moisture after the last few years of heavy drought can't be at the same levels it was. And plus the efficiency of the agricultural watering systems can't really be at 95%. I repeat myself on that. Also on the chloride water level metric, you know, that's the same graph that I've seen for years now. And that blue line, that dotted blue projected water level metric, I mean, anybody looking at that, there's no way that it could be projected like that when you look at the real data. And that line hasn't changed for years either, even though the data has been showing, you know, it's only at 2 feet, you know, we need to be at 8 feet, and it's not going to jump up to 8 feet by 2025 as your projected number goes, you know, we're almost there. So anyway, I have an issue with that particular metric or that graph that you're showing. That's all.
Thank you.
There's no further public comment at this time.
Okay, with that, I'll bring it back to the commission and for further discussion. Charlie, you said you had some further comments.
Yes, thank you. I guess I'm going to go right to the point here about the basin yield metric and the use of 2,760 acre foot sustainable yield estimate. I don't think that that's justified, and I don't think it was never adopted by the proper procedure as dictated in the stipulated judgment agreement. I share the blame for this. We let this go for a long time. So I'm not pointing any fingers. We're all to blame for this. But the problem with using that sustainable yield figure, the 2,760 acre feet of sustainable yield, is that it's not coherent with the other data we're presenting. That indicates that we have a surplus of water available. When the 3 water purveyors wrote, I think now 2 years ago in a joint purveyor letter, that we all believe that there's insufficient water supply for even the existing population in Los Osos. So the 3 water purveyors at that time didn't agree that we had surplus water like that. Recently, the Coastal Commission has written also that there's insufficient water supply for even the existing development within Los Osos without coastal resource harm. This is in the letter they wrote yesterday. The state water board continues to declare Los Osos water basin as a severely overdrafted water basin. So our other data seems to point to this also. We're showing a decrease in groundwater storage by our estimates here. We're showing a decrease in available water because of seawater intrusion. So I just am lodging a protest against the use of that number. And if you remember, I voted to not accept that annual report last year as a small measure of that protest, and I'm likely to do that again this year.
Charlie, if I could just comment on your comment. And I hear what you're saying. One of the things we agreed to is not go back and look at that number, but regarding the figure that we're using today, one of the at least in my mind, key factors is the location of our pumping. And so that yield may be there, but our pumping's in the wrong location. And that's something that by shifting these wells, there may be additional yield out there to be utilized in a safe manner to protect our basin. So just kind of came to mind when you're mentioning that. So I think, we're going to hear about this program Seawell next. I probably need to keep moving in that direction. And, another thing I think about when we look at our history and reflecting back to what's not working right now. I mean, one of the key components of this basin plan was the community-wide funding mechanism. So we could implement these projects in a timely manner. And that hasn't, that's been our biggest hurdle so far. So, I think overall, we at least in my mindset, I think all of us as purveyors have done a remarkable job under our budgets and managing the projects and completing the projects that we can and still staying united in our goal to shift our pumping and complete the projects we can. And that was one of the reasons why I made that comment earlier about, I don't want to give up yet. I think we should be proud of what we've done so far. May not be, I don't think any of us will say that we've accomplished exactly what that plan was supposed to be, but through our adaptive measurements, we're doing a good job managing this basin. And that's why I would still like to have input more than I feel today I have input versus a Sigma process. There was a comment also on the graph, and I think that projected graph was something that came out originally in the basin plan. And that was, like what we're talking about with completing certain projects and certain, timelines. Without that community funding plan, we haven't been able to do that. And we may not be able to follow that projected plan as it was stated back at the time when it was developed. But I think overall, it gives us a good projection of what our goals are and keeps us in line of, are we reaching those goals? May not be as quick as we wanted to, and the timing of it may not be there, but are we moving in the right direction?
Is it okay for me to reply? I agree in principle with what Director Zimmer's saying, that what he's saying is the truth. What my problem is, just to clarify, that the sustainable yield figure is a sustainable yield figure for that particular year. That's for sustainable yield in 2021 is what it's supposed to represent. Our present in the old method of doing this, next year we'll begin a different measurement regime based on a different philosophical way of looking at this. But in this old methodology, the sustainable yield in this case for 2021 is not really representing what the Basin Management Committee feels was the sustainable yield in 2021. That's projected out into time based on, like, as you're saying, based on the future achievements of the programs that we're doing and expectation of improvements in yield as these programs are implemented. In fact, Spencer Harris has said that it's based on a model input of greater than 17 inches per year of rainfall every single year. And at the same time, carrying that forward into geological time to estimate this sustainable yield figure. So using that philosophy, this sustainable yield of 2,760 that has been used for the past several years is not really representing the sustainable yield assumed for that year, for 2021. It's and I think you were getting at this, that it's a future assumed value if we continue making improvements in the basin and we do our jobs and we see these improvements way out into time, and we've had 17 and a half or 17.3 inches of rain every single year that happens. And that's, but you and I think, see this the same way, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And I think, just documenting that in the narrative is maybe helpful as we go along, because we don't want to lose that, you're not here, I'm not here, we're not here. We want to make sure whoever reads that in the future is clear on what happened.
Yeah, and so thank you for saying that. And I think that I think that it would be nice, perhaps whatever happens with this annual report that we're required to produce, whether this table is blank or whether we have figures in there, I think it would be good to have an explanation about the changes in philosophical approach that are being made beginning after this measurement year. That indicate that we're planning to use sustainable yield figures for the measurement year that better represent what we feel that the sustainable yield is for that measurement year.
Okay, anybody else need any further direction, Daniel?
Well, just a couple of responses or a couple of questions there. And Director Cody's, I think you'll see in the 2021 report a description of the methodology and the results associated with the updated sustainable yield effort or estimate that was calculated for calendar year 2022. So I guess the intent would be to use that document as that documentation. And if it doesn't describe in detail as much about sort of the philosophical components of it, that'd be good comments to provide, and we can incorporate that there. So it is a reference to people when we see what will look to be like a very significant change in the basin yield metric when you compare the 2021 annual report to the 2022 annual report.
If it's okay, I'd like to address one of the comments I made earlier about, and some of the public comments about estimating non-metered flows. And this has to do with what Director Oshelski was saying before about our stipulated judgment agreement that was necessary to make some compromises and to make some difficult agreements in the formation of the basin. And some of those had to do with how these non-metered flows were going to be estimated. And for people who haven't, it's in each one of these annual reports, there's a fairly detailed description of how these are being done, and also in the basin plan. The basin plan describes the agreement, and the stipulated judgment has some of that information too. And the annual reports describe the attempts to maintain that agreement, to make these things. So at least when I was asking for some more detail about the agricultural flows, that's after reading this week 9 of the annual reports and studying that part of those reports. I think there ought to be some more detail in there, but it's very interesting reading, and it's actually, those agreements are a pretty heroic gesture made by the people who signed the stipulated judgment and created the basin plan. It's a risky business, but necessary to make those estimates.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add to that, because we got that question a couple of times, that the ag production estimates are based off the soil moisture budget, local precipitation, land use, and evapotranspiration data for the year that they are developed. And there is a detailed description of those calculations, as Director Cody describes in Appendix G of the annual report. And so that's the methodology we've used, and we've received some comments. And if there are comments on opportunities or ways to improve upon that, I think the BMC staff would be open to looking at that. But those are developed using, the latest techniques and best available data and information that we have. But new information and new methodologies are always being developed, and if there's opportunities to improve those calculations, I again, I think BMC staff would be open to that and reevaluating that. There was one other question about the nitrate metric. I want to clarify. So the nitrate metric was 17, and then the units for that are 17 milligrams per liter, and it's decreasing. It has been higher than that. It's now the target is 10, so it's not at the target yet, but it is showing a declining trend to that will hopefully allow us to get to the target of 10 at some point in the future.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item 8B, which is the third program C well implementation status. Can we have a report? And I have to step away from the meeting for a few minutes, so Mark will be chairing it. I should be back in a few minutes. So.
Yep. Thank you, Marshall. Yeah, item 8B, consider authorization of the use of technical support adaptive management services to evaluate re-inclusion of the third well into program C or provide alternate direction to staff. Just a little bit of the history here. In 2015, the basin plan included 3 wells in program C with the intent of, and that when I say 3 wells, the construction of 3 new wells to provide water to the purveyors and to allow the purveyors to shift their pumping from the lower aquifer in the western area to central and eastern portions of the basin to reduce the threat of seawater intrusion. On March 20th, 2019, the BMC received a tech memo evaluating the infrastructure program C, which recommended deferral of the third well from that program based on estimates of the sustainable yield and estimated demands at that time. However, in 2021, as we've discussed, the BMC has updated the methodology for calculating the sustainable yield, and that updated sustainable yield is anticipated to, in calendar year 2022, have a basin yield metric that indicates that we're above that target, meaning that additional actions need to be taken to meet the target. And those additional actions can really come in 3 forms, as I see it. 1, additional conservation to lower the groundwater production. 2, implementation of additional program, basin plan programs and other projects to increase the sustainable yield. And then 3, allowing time for the Broderson mound to fully develop. It likely is going to take a combination of all 3 of those actions to meet the target. But one of the recommendations here is to reevaluate whether or not including that third well back into program C should be part of the BMC's implementation plan for the basin plan. And so to begin that work, the next step, as I see it, is to have the BMC's hydrogeologists update the calculations for what we think these additional basin plan projects, specifically the program C wells, will provide in terms of increased sustainable yield. And the need to do that is because while there are estimates of how much the basin plan programs will increase the sustainable yield in the basin plan, we've modified the methodology for estimating the sustainable yield with the updated calculation in 2021. And that modified methodology is anticipated to impact the amount of increase to the sustainable yield that the program C wells will provide. And so it's recommended that the BMC authorize its hydrogeologist to perform that updated evaluation, both for the second program C well, which the CSD is currently in the middle of implementing, as well as a potential third program C well, to better inform the BMC on whether or not that third well should be re-included into program C. The anticipated cost to do this technical evaluation is $4,500. It's anticipated this could be funded through the Technical Support Adaptive Management Services approved budget for calendar year 2022. And the next steps would be that upon authorization, the BMC's hydrogeologist would perform that technical evaluation, provide a tech memo with those updated sustainable yield estimate increases, and then those results and a formal recommendation for whether or not to re-include that third well into Program C would be brought back to the BMC for their consideration. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Any questions from the board?
Yeah, just one quick question. I know we're going to talk about it in a minute, the transient model. We would support what you're proposing, but would then the third Program C well be included in the scenario analyses that you intend to do using the transient model?
That's a good question.
Yes. Yes, it would. Short answer. Longer answer is, yeah, in an ideal world, we would, have the transient model and then do what I would call a more robust evaluation of the benefits that the second and third Program C wells will provide. I think the intent here is to use the best tool sets we have right now to inform the BMC and these basin management program adaptive management decisions, to help the purveyors potentially start the planning processes. As we've seen with the second Program C well, they can take a significant amount of time just to get through the planning, the permitting, and then even the construction and bidding. So yeah, we would use the steady state model now to perform the updated evaluation, but then envision that we would again, incorporate these wells at whatever phase they're in or anticipated to be in the transient model as well. It's a good question.
That's a good question. Charlie? No. Okay, we'll go to public comment.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please raise your hand.
Lindy, and this is my eternal question is, you have a basin, got many sides to it. You put a straw, all the straws in here, and you sucked it out so that it pulled the ocean in. What's the difference if you go put the straw in the middle or on another side? You're just slowing down the eventual use of this water when we don't have 17 inches of rain and we do not see any incoming water. So the truth is, eventually we're going to suck all the water out of the basin. We're just slowing it down. We're stopping the seawater from forever taking away our storage, that if we were to have, the East Coast come live here for 10 years, which would be kind of nice, that we could fill all our basins. But it just always throws me off. I don't understand where moving straws around saves a basin. It just gives us longer time to not damage it, correct? Yeah, maybe if somebody has a good explanation.
There's no public comment online.
Okay, we'll bring it back for the board for comments. And I just want to add, we would support moving the well. I think, overall the hydraulic pull that you have in that basin is a key reason for that. And we have wells today that we see that, I don't remember, we don't talk about it as much anymore, but we had the fingering, and those were directly correlated to wells and their locations. And so moving away from that and getting these wells in the easterly portion of the basin is, that's just been identified in the plan. I don't, I'm not a hydrogeologist, but those were key projects that I think everybody supports. And it's just the hydraulic pull from where that position of that well is located.
But it's not creating more water.
No, we're not saying we're creating more water. Yeah.
Yeah, the transmissibility of the matrix that the water's moving in I'm sitting right next to Blaine. Director Reilly, but if you think of a really large milkshake that's a mile long, you can drink out of a cold milkshake on one side, and it would take a long time for the depression you create drinking out of that milkshake 200 feet away before it begins changing the level of the milkshake far away from that. And that's the idea, that you do change the damage. And I think that Lindy's correct that it creates some sort of a delay, but it's even more important than a delay. And if you use a mind experiment of moving east quite a long way, it helps. Or digging holes in the sand on the beach. Does that sound right, Director Reilly?
That's a very good visual. Yes.
So, are we ready to have some director comments?
Yeah, you can comment on that.
So in keeping with that idea that the basin isn't homogeneous everywhere, we're talking about the new program Seawell, and it does seem quite obvious to us, even at S&T, that creating a new additional high flow program Seawell in the east will benefit the basin. That it seems relatively obvious that would be a benefit. Think about, though, for a minute, the position of S&T pressed up against the west side of the basin. And we have mentioned many times in the discussions of these program Seawells that S&T would like to own a portion, a share of one of these program Seawells. It's very difficult for that to be actually achieved with the present structure of the Basin Management Committee, where there's no shared ability to share assets, really. I'm gonna run off the mouth here just for a little bit. I apologize, but in the interlocutory stipulated judgment document that was signed by the 4 members of the Basin Management Committee, there is an agreement to do water wheeling that hasn't been discussed really in the 8 years I've been going to these meetings. That would help implementing the water wheeling agreements that we all signed up to, all of our heirs or people, representatives signed up for this in the interlocutory stipulated judgment. That the implementation of those agreements would make this much more attractive for S&T. Being pressed all the way up against the west side of the basin, we really do have sustainability problems that are different from the other 2 water purveyors. And we're seeing not just seawater intrusion that has destroyed one of our lower aquifer wells, but nitrate pollution that's destroying, that has destroyed 3 of our wells, made them freshwater not available. And our present only remaining water source is failing due to nitrate pollution from high density permitted septic systems. We really are interested in fresh water probably from other areas of the basin. And so I'd like to think about this discussion going forward, including the discussions about water wheeling or shared ownership of those assets.
Okay. Yeah, just a comment on that water wheeling, reflect back to my comment about the community funding. Many of these projects that we were going to develop and wheel the water, that was going to create the water for wheeling, was going to be co-owned and funded by this community funding plan. So, you know, it just today we're faced with that challenge. We're working through that, and the staff is coming up with this funding mechanism, and how does the governance look? You know, those kind of details, I think those discussions will come a little bit clearer once we have that mechanism in place. Yeah. But right now, I want to reflect back on something that Dan said, is the timing. You know, to wait for those structures to be in place, it seems like those hurdles are bigger than we envisioned in the beginning. And so the timing to wait and to pause and then have those in place and then go after moving a third program C, we'll have to consider that part of it too, you know. Okay. So we have an action item under 8B, and that is to fund the technical study by Cleve Harris, geologist. Do we have a motion on that or further discussion?
There's no further discussion. I forgot, this is Blaine really with the county. I would make a motion to authorize the use of the technical support adaptive management services budget to perform the reevaluation that Dan's requesting.
Okay. A second, or am I able to second it? Yeah.
I'll second that motion on the proposal as presented.
All right. Do we need a roll call for that, Dan? All in favor? Okay, all in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'll turn it back over to me.
Okay, I'm gonna turn it back over to Director Ohitsky.
Okay, so that brings us down to action item 8C, the WRFP study and transient model RFP.
Thank you, Marshall. Yes, item 8C. So what we have for you today is an RFP, or I should say a draft RFP, that there was a request to bring this forward to the BMC to provide them an opportunity to review and comment. This RFP is for the completion of what we're calling a water recycling funding program facilities planning study, which, as described earlier and in previous meetings, incorporates the development of a transient model and utilization of that transient model. And when I say transient model, I really mean transient groundwater model, though we've talked about it enough that hopefully everybody understands that. But this RFP, if approved by the BMC, would be released by the LOCSD as they're the lead agency for this initiative for obtaining the grant and managing the consultant contracts. Again, just for reference, the funding for this study was coming from both the county's contribution of $150,000 and then hopefully an anticipated matching amount of funding from the State Water Resource Control Board Water Recycling Funding Grant Program. But if the BMC approves of the RFP or has comments, but it approves of it in substantially and gives authorization for the executive director to work with the LOCST to release this RFP once the grant funding has been approved, then we can move forward quickly in procuring consultants to complete that work and initiating the development of a transient model and utilization of that model to improve our understanding of the basin and the opportunities to increase its sustainability.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Oh, you do.
I just have a quick question. Is this the first time this is presented to the public, or did the district present this?
I believe that the district reviewed the grant application that included is included and authorized the submission of the grant application. I don't believe that the district has approved the RFP, but would be approving releasing the RFP after the BMC's.
We did approve the submission of the application, correct?
So there's no approval process for this. You're just ready to go right now. Is that correct?
Brad's not here. So.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I'm probably asking too many technical questions. The basis of my question is just, I don't know if from the basin management side, if Toby Moore's had a shot at looking at this yet or not. So he's our staff hydrogeologist. I thought maybe it'd be good. Definitely don't want to delay the process at all. So
well, I mean,
yeah, no.
Yeah, let's go to public comment
Okay.
before we have a discussion.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're in the audience, come to the podium. And if you are online, please raise your hand. There's no public comment at this time.
Okay, we'll close public comment and bring it back. It seems to me that, I mean, moving forward, this, you know, I don't see any problem with taking the approach that Daniel's suggesting at this point. I'm assuming that Ron has bought into this approach.
Yeah, that I got some info from Rob and Ron. Sorry, it will be improved at the May meeting and then released.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right.
I'd just like to, this is Charlie from S&T.
We know that.
We know that. I'd just like to point out that part of what we're seeing here, this is a cumbersome and awkward process. And we might as well say that this is the way these things will work, because the BMC is not the type of organization that can have a bank account. It's not the type of organization that can do budgeting or jointly own infrastructure. And so what we see here is what really, for all of practical world, appears to be an agreement between the county and the community services district. I don't have any particular problem with that, but I want to point out that that's a very awkward and cumbersome process that I hope we can rectify in the future. And I agree with Director Zimmer when he says that time is of the essence here, and I agree with that. I'm not going to delay this anymore with any more of this talk, but I just wanted to say that out loud. It's the elephant in the room here. At the same time, there's some spelling problems with this. There's a word missing in the first sentence where it says a project to develop a transient groundwater and prepare a water recycling. There's a word model left out. And that's not the only place. There's some other things here. It's not a big deal. You could publish this and send it out and people will fill that in automatically in their mind. But also, as I read this, I notice that this is largely a wastewater recycling project that this is funding, is the largest part of this, perhaps. And there's very little said in the specification about the actual transient groundwater model. I'm disappointed in that. There's a lot more said about the distribution of recycled water from the wastewater treatment plant in this proposal. I understand that that's what the county's mostly interested in, and they're ponying up the budget for this. One other thing in the schedule on page 4 of 11 of this, the study recycled water and water supply alternatives. That's not actually it. There's a.
You're looking for the chart or the?
There's a schedule, sort of a
page 3.
Page 3. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's some things missing here that I'm a little disappointed in. For instance, the date when the BMC would participate in interviews of the prospective candidates. The BMC review of there's a district review of proposals, but there's no mention of a BMC review of proposals and a date for that. I assume that that's just an error. It's an honest mistake left out of there. Also, when will the BMC meet to approve the award of the contract? That's not on the schedule either. And that's part of the cumbersome part of this process, where this is essentially an agreement between the county and the community services district. But this is of very crucial importance to the Basin Management Committee. And I'd like to see that project schedule change to reflect some of the Basin Management Committee participation in this project.
Any other comments?
Yeah, this is Blaine Reilly with the county. We would concur with your comments and requests. It is an important project for the Basin Management Committee, and from our perspective, we want intense involvement on the part of the committee and committee staff. Just for clarification, the funding that we're making available is specifically for the transient model. So the other scope of services within the RFP related to that, to the recycling engineering, preliminary engineering and things like that, that's what's getting funded from the other half of the funding, from the grant part of the funding. So our funding is earmarked to reimburse the district for the transient groundwater model development and calibration. And just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Yeah, a couple responses there. Director Reilly, I think, described it pretty well. It's transient model funding from one source, recycled water grant funding from the other. We're applying for water recycling funding program grant. And so it's structured to look like a water, and it incorporates both, but there's, admittedly, an emphasis on the water recycling components of this, as that is a prerequisite of the grant. In terms of BMC review and participation, this is why we brought this RFP to the BMC, to get that type of input. We've talked all along, what we've envisioned is that there's to be a technical advisory committee that would be formed and consisting of BMC party staff that would be involved in key project milestones. And we can talk about this further with this group. As you described, Charlie, the BMC and this, really the larger relationship creates for a cumbersome structure. And regional collaboration is wonderful, and lots of very important things get done, but it's a slow, sometimes messy process. And so, looking for opportunities to kind of strike that balance, I think could be important. So I'd like to get input from the BMC here. If maybe we couldn't find ways to incorporate BMC representatives at a staff level without necessarily the need, and maybe this isn't what you were referring to, but having to bring to the BMC and the CSD board as necessary to move through this process. We can do that, but it will definitely slow it down and cost additional money, especially if we need to bring the technical consultants to those additional meetings.
Excuse me. Okay, you don't need any action, correct?
Well, I guess I think maybe board direction to move forward, and also direction on what level of involvement the BMC, specifically the board, wants to have in this process, as we move forward in terms of consultant direction, or could some of that be deferred, or I should say not deferred, delegated to BMC party staff representatives? I guess I'd look for some input on that. I just don't want to make this move forward and then come to a point where the BMC had an expectation that it was going to be involved in a key process or milestone and have that not occur.
One issue with that has been an issue occasionally in the past is that really S&T, I'm the technical person who would represent S&T in this, and I'm also a seated director on the BMC board. The rules about that, if there's any problem with that, with me participating on a staff level, I think we should discuss that openly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've discussed that in the past, and we haven't had concerns about your participation at a staff level, given the just limited number of staff at S&T Mutual.
So I guess I would like to make a motion that we accept this proposal as presented with the changes I described about adding the required basin management committee reviews and interviews and approval at award of contract dates on this project schedule.
And when we say basin management committee, do we mean BMC board of directors or BMC staff? The other thing is, this item will be going, contract award will be going to the CSD for approval. So, I mean, there will be an opportunity for public review and comments on the award. But what I'm looking for specifically, is the desire of the BMC directors to also bring the contract award, even though the BMC is not party to the contract, to the BMC for approval.
I appreciate that the CSD taking the lead on this. I mean, that's the spirit of the ISJ as we're structured today, is, everybody has these in-kind services and takes the lead role when they can. And so I don't want to slow it down. I don't think it needs to come before the board personally, as long as you're discussing it at the staff level. As far as Charlie's participation, I don't have any problem with this actual item, but maybe some of the other items, it might be a little awkward. So, having you sit in on this and participate in that, you're more than welcome to do that from my position. But I think we should not make this more cumbersome than it needs to be. And I appreciate the district taking the lead on it. It just, work through the staff and with that.
I'd like to amend my motion based on what Director Zimmer just said, as a compromise and agreement with Director Zimmer. That my new amended motion would be to accept this proposal when it adds project schedule dates for, I'm trying to find this, for inclusion of dates for BMC technical committee review, BMC technical committee participation in interviews, and BMC technical committee meeting to approve the award of the contract.
Recommend.
That's what it says. That's the third from the bottom is,
But that's.
board meeting to award the contract is.
The CSD.
That's a CSD board is all that's included in here now.
Right, but you can make a recommendation, you can't approve it.
That's right. That's part of the cumbersome part of this, but it would go to the BMC. I doubt that the CSD board would approve something that the BMC technical committee had a problem with, but they would be able to do that.
Okay, how about this? Approval of the RFP with following modifications. District and BMC technical staff review of proposals. District and BMC staff, technical staff participation in interviews, and then district and BMC technical staff recommendation of award, followed by district board award of contract.
That's very close. I agree with that motion, and I'd like to make that motion as stated.
All right, thank you.
And I'll second that motion.
All right, any more discussion? Okay, oops, seeing none, we'll take a vote.
Actually, I have one quick
Oh.
question. Right now, the funding is not in place to fund this project. Are you intending to issue the RFP and go through the process prior to the receipt of funding?
No, good point of clarification. Yeah, this contingent on award of funding from the State Water Resource Control Board would be good to add in that approval. Yeah.
It would be. Okay, so can you amend your motion to include that?
I think so.
Okay,
So let me take a crack at it. Is that,
I don't think you need to.
okay?
Do you, is that good? Your
Yeah.
second, the seconder is good with that? All right,
I'm-
let's have a
I'm
roll
fine.
call vote.
Director Cody,
Yes.
Director Reilly,
Yes.
Director Zimmer,
Yes.
Chair Ohilsky.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
All right, we're down to the second last item, item 8D. BMC Legal Counsel RFP. The only item after that is adjournment, so that's what I said too.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so item 8B, second RFP before us today. This is an RF, and it should really characterize this as an RFQ, differentiating a request for proposals from a request for qualifications. As discussed previously in the calendar year 2022 budget, the BMC approved a contingency amount in the executive director's line item for legal counsel support, specifically dedicated legal counsel to advise and provide legal input to the BMC specifically and to the BMC directors and staff. Historically, the BMC has relied upon advice and input from legal counsel representing the individual parties, which has been very much appreciated. But we have identified times, opportunities, and certain subjects where it was determined that it would be beneficial to have sort of third-party legal counsel to advise the BMC specifically to ensure compliance with stipulated judgment and other regulatory laws and frameworks. And so included in this agenda item is, again, a draft request for qualifications for contract legal services for the BMC, and with review and if approved by the BMC, staff can move forward with soliciting statements of qualifications from qualified legal firms to have available in the event that the BMC needs dedicated legal input.
Anybody have any questions before we go to public comment or?
Save it for.
Okay, any public comment? Let's go.
If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. There's no public comment at this time.
Okay, we'll close public comment and bring it back to our body here. So Mark, you had some
Well,
questions.
yeah, just
or
a
comments?
comment. You know, I supportive of the legal counsel and but just the expense of legal expenses, they can escalate quickly. And, you know, I've stated that concern before. sensitive to Dan, your need of needing that service. Just want to make the comment that, we really need to be aware of how expensive this legal could get. And, some of the comments that we've heard from the public is, our administrative costs and the cost of studies that we're doing. My focus remains on BMC projects. I would hate to take funding that at least that Golden State could provide towards basin management and basin projects and spend it on legal fees. So I don't really have any concern with the RFP or anything like that, but just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, Charlie.
Yeah, I agree with, once again, with Director Zimmer, but I think that can be handled with skill by skillfully ring fencing the questions that you ask to a legal counsel. I don't think we have to be terribly afraid. It is expensive by the hour. The other suggestion I have include with that, first of all, that statement is to be very careful about wording requests formally, to limit the request to specific things, and then ask for the opinion in writing so that the opinion, we don't repeat that a couple of years from now, that question comes up and we ask for that opinion again. We can avoid that by getting written opinions and storing those in our company database. And otherwise, I'm not terribly afraid of the cost of the legal work, but it has to be handled skillfully.
Yeah, I think the primary reason that we started with this was that we didn't want to see that there was a conflict with your legal staff giving an opinion and our legal staff and the county's legal staff. So not all of this stuff is going to go to this. It's just if there's a potential for a conflict, that's the only stuff that would go to this. So,
and it just replying back to Director Cody, maybe there is an opportunity where, I don't know, there's an office hour, lack of better words for that, but a set of time that you would have, because I see this as a tool for you to manage your job. And it is helpful to have that little, if not a direct question, but more just clarification and assurance. When you're making these kind of decisions, I could see in somewhere, maybe we talk about this later on, but somewhere in the framework, there's a set amount of time that you're allowed to make those kind of calls, to be that stringent. I like that, having those written and prepared questions and answers, and we can see that. That's a great comment, but also to give Dan the tool he needs, maybe there's a small chunk that we could allow him for that quick response, and whoever's retained is aware of that, and they log that under just a blanket.
Well, in the approval that we gave in the budget, he has the ability to go to 5, and then that stops it. So
yeah, I trust Dan as being the skillful person we described, and we'll also be seeing these charges in the budget. So I'd like to make a motion to accept this RFQ and get it moving in a timely manner.
I'll second.
Okay. You want it? I'll take the vote. All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, unanimously. Okay, with that being said, we wanted to talk about our next meeting, and I'll adjourn then. Yeah, nobody commented. So next meeting is, Dan, do you have a meeting date, or should I just let that go?
Next meeting is scheduled for May 18th, 2022. I would anticipate us having that meeting. We're in the middle of the annual report preparation, and so we will likely be hosting meetings in May and June as we work through the review and approval of the 2021 annual report, as well as a number of other initiatives that BMC staff is working on.
Okay, with that, I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance, the public and the members and staff, especially Laura coming back from Austin. somewhere in Texas. How's that? An unknown place in Texas. And Margaret for being here and you preparing the staff report and everybody taking time out of their day. So with that, we'll be adjourned.
Thank you.